Welcome to EdCircuit Author Chats, produced by MindRocket Media Group and presented by John Catt Educational. John Catt Educational is proud to feature a roster of authors that includes education experts and practitioners in the UK and North America. In this interview series, many of our authors will have the opportunity to discuss their latest publications and give you insights into the inspiration and strategies behind their books.
Hello and welcome to EdCircuit Authors Chat. My name is Bonnie Williams from MindRocket Media Group, and joining me today is Dr. Katharine Beals. In this episode, we will discuss Dr. Beals' newest book with John Catt Educational, Students with Autism, How to Improve Language, Literacy, and Academic Success, which explores the root causes of the language and learning challenges in autism, their various academic consequences, and a variety of tools and strategies for addressing them. Katharine has a PhD in linguistics and is an adjunct professor in the autism program at the Drexel University School of Education, where she designed 2 of the program's 5 courses. She also teaches courses on autism at the Graduate School of Education at the University of Pennsylvania. Including her work in academia, where she specializes in language and literacy acquisition in autism, language technologies for autistic individuals, educational challenges for students with autism, and the problems with facilitated communication as an intervention in autism. Katharine is the designer of SentenceWeaver, a comprehensive linguistic software curriculum for language-impaired students with autism, a contributor at facilitatedcommunication.org, and also an autism parent. Katharine has a comprehensive writing career, including several books and articles, including pieces in The Atlantic, Education News, Nonpartisan Education Review, and the Philadelphia Inquirer. Katharine, welcome to Author Chats.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
To start us off, Katharine, can you discuss your interest in autism and how your background in linguistics led you to your research?
Sure. So originally, my interest in linguistics was much more theoretical, but then I had an autistic son who had difficulty learning language. And so that was obviously a connection to bridge and to figure out ways to learn more about language in autism and use my linguistics background to help him, and then ultimately see what I did for him might be useful to others as well.
Do you think that teachers are trained and prepared to fully understand autism and its implications in the classroom?
I think that there's probably some gaps that can be filled. Not everybody, to be fair, not all special ed teachers specialize specifically in autism, and to really prepare someone for an autism specific classroom, you would need to go into a great deal of depth. There is a great deal of depth, and there is a lot to learn about with autism, partly because some of what we know about autism implies teaching considerations that might be counterintuitive to a lot of people. Autistic children need a degree of structure and direct instruction that many classroom teachers aren't prepared or really encouraged to provide. So my sense is that some of that is apparent to people who teach kids with autism, but as far as things like language and comprehension and reading comprehension go, there's always more to learn. And to really help these kids address some of the more challenging language and comprehension difficulties, it would be helpful to get a little bit more into the brass tacks of what's going on in autism.
Yeah, I see that. Yes. Well, in your book, you discuss autism-friendly teaching techniques. Katharine, what is one technique that may surprise our listeners?
Well, I think that there's an overall approach that may surprise a lot of people simply because it's very much at odds with what people are encouraged to as what people are encouraged to think of as the best way to teach in ed school training programs. So people tend to be encouraged these days to think of your ideal classroom as a child-centered discovery group activity sort of situation where the teacher really minimizes the amount of time they spend in front of the classroom directly instructing. And the ideal seems to be no more than 8 or 9 or 10 minutes up there in front of the class, and then you hand things off to the students. And that is kind of the opposite of what children with autism really, really need. Arguably, there's a good case that that's also true of students in general. But it's very much true for kids with autism. The kids with autism are kind of like the canary in the coal mine for a lot of these educational practices, because that's when they really fall apart. Stuff that doesn't work for a lot of kids really doesn't work for kids with autism. And the reason is that incidental learning, where you just kind of pick things up from the environment, you can get a certain distance with a lot of kids, and there are some kids who, for example, will learn how to read without any real instruction. But kids with autism, there are various reasons why they're not as tuned in to people's speech and conversations and just informational linguistic stuff that's around them. They're just not soaking that up the way other kids do. So they really depend more than other kids do on the teacher finding ways to attract their attention and deliberately expose them to stuff that other kids might be able to learn on their own.
So now, autism is this spectrum, with varying specialized needs. So now, how did your book address students across the spectrum?
Right, that's tricky. And it is the case that because my book mostly talks about regular ed classrooms, it is, and I try to make this clear in those chapters, skewed towards kids who are more in the moderate to mild level of functioning. But I do also discuss, particularly in the chapter on facilitated communication and alternatives, some of the issues that arise with more severely affected kids. Also in the chapter on basic approaches like applied behavioral analysis and the language teaching. So there are access points for kids at different points along the spectrum. For me, the big area of variability is how much language does the kid have to begin with, and then how do we work with where that child is linguistically? Because language really comes first. To access the academic curriculum, you need to be able to understand words and what people say. And then once you address some of the linguistic basics, and then you have tools to use. The child has tools to use to understand other levels of instruction. So it's a huge spectrum, huge heterogeneity, and particular for the purposes of my book, a huge range of beginning linguistic skills. Some kids have, kids are at different places in the language spectrum, depending on how severely affected they are and also how old they are.
Right. So what is one thing that teachers can do to really start to understand this whole autism spectrum? What is it that they can really do to kind of get a grasp on it?
Well, I would say that one of the first things to really get a handle on is what are the underlying issues that affect language learning and learning in particular. And that goes back to what I was saying about incidental learning and not tuning into people's voices. Teachers need to, and I try to evoke this in the first chapter, need to think about how, for someone with autism, often the most salient sound in the room is not the sound of someone's voice, But it might be like right now, I can hear trolleys going by outside my window. I can hear, the sounds of construction and other things. And so for me, if I were affected to a certain degree by autism, I would not necessarily really be paying that much attention to your voice. I would be distracted by all this other stuff. So I think it's helpful to put your mind, for a teacher to put themselves in that mindset where, imagine what it'd be like if most of the stuff that's drawing your attention is environmental sounds and environmental noise. Maybe it's the fluorescent lights above your head or whatever might be going on, the cluttering of papers. And then ask yourself, well, what do I need to do as a teacher to draw the child's attention to me and to my voice? And there are various techniques like speaking a little more saliently, slowing down. There's some evidence that like musical speech, tones, even singing can help. It'll depend on if you're a classroom teacher with a whole big class. You can't tailor all of this just to, a couple of autistic students in your class. But it also points to the importance of having as much one-on-one instruction as possible. Because if you have one person interacting with someone who's highly distractible, then that person has an easier time, working with one distractible child as opposed to a whole bunch of distractible children.
Right. Now, I mentioned before, individualized education plans, IEPs, are one way that students with disabilities are able to get the specialized instruction they need to succeed. So how does your work fold into IEP strategies?
Well, one of the things I stress is that another ingredient for maximizing success is having a thorough evaluation of each child to figure out exactly where they are at the moment. What can they do independently in different areas, not just language, but other skills? And so built into the IEP ideally would be where they are now and what is a reasonable next step. And then that hopefully plays out with actual practice in the classroom. But all the evidence points, and this is actually true for kids in general, that kids will make the most progress if you meet them where they are and go just the next level up. But for kids with autism and other special needs, you at least have an IEP that can help you do that.
Okay, so I have one last question for you. Now, for teachers looking to expand their knowledge of teaching students with autism, what are some resources to learn more? I mean, where can they go to learn more about this?
One of the reasons I wrote this book actually was because I didn't feel that there was much out there for lay people that addressed these issues. So you will find a fair number of books about how to set up an autism-friendly classroom and how to, reduce the clutter in your classroom and add visual supports and labels and schedules. What I felt was missing was the content and how do we actually, once we have that classroom, what do we do next? How do we instruct? How do we go about instructing? So I would say that, not to toot my own horn too much, but I would say that the first thing that comes to mind is my book, and then the references I have at the ends of the various chapters. And I mean, I also have a website, and people can contact me and Katharine .p.beals@gmail.com, or they can go to katharinebeals.com for more info. But yeah, I mean, you're sort of tapping into the reason I wrote this book in the first place, which is that actually there aren't that many kind of user-friendly sources that give you that much information.
Right.
Possibly as a follow-up book, I've talked about this with my editor, that possibly as a follow-up book, I would create a more concrete sets of exercises and things that people can do, particularly for like reading comprehension, where there really are some pretty good strategies out there that people have found to be effective.
Yeah, well, I think as I mentioned when we first started talking, this is I wish I had your book when I first got into the field. All right, so Katharine, I'm really interested in linguistic software program SentenceWeaver. Can you tell me and us a little more about that?
Yeah, I would be happy to. That was actually one of the first things I did before I started looking at broader education issues. And the reason that I created this program was because here I am, I've trained as a linguist, and now I have a computer linguist. And so I had, fresh programming skills there. And so it occurred to me that because, as I said, these kids don't seem to learn incidentally from the environment. They're not picking language up, just by listening in the way most kids do. A computer program, these kids love computers, a computer program that systematically, step by step, teaches them the rules of English grammar. And by grammar, I mean like the fundamentals, like where does the subject, the verb, the object go, and how do you put a sentence together? Not the stuff you learn in school, but the stuff you don't have to learn in school. If I could do something like that, then I might be able to jumpstart his language and get him to a point where he could actually access regular education classrooms. And so that's where that came from. And I kind of did it in real time, by which I mean that I would program a lesson and then he would immediately do the lesson. And then based on how he did on the lesson, I would tweak the program and then I'd make another lesson and so on and so forth. So he was my beta tester. He was my first user and all that. And it worked. He would clearly was able to, it's a text-based program. It actually now has a speech component, but he got really good at typing. He got really good at expressing himself in writing, and he was able to go into regular education, which was still a challenge for him, but he now had the expressive tools for that. And so I have a chapter where I describe this, and there is a website where you can learn more about it that I can give you the information for. But I've had a number of kids now over the years who are like him in one way or another, kids who have some rudimentary language skills, some rudimentary word recognition skills, but who have difficulty putting words into grammatical sentences and verb tenses and asking questions in the right word order to ask questions and all that kind of thing. So I describe the program in detail in the 5th chapter, and I think there's also a link at the end of the chapter to the website, which is autism-language-therapies.com. It's a little bit of a clumsy name.
Anything else you want to tell us, Katharine? Any other information that you can give us now about specific websites of yours to go to? Everything will be in the show notes.
Yeah, so I have a general website with information about me and my publications, and that's Katharine Beals, all one word, .com. And then I have a blog together with Catherine Johnson, who is another autism parent. She's written books with Temple Grandin and like Animals in Translation. She's the co-author, but she has an autistic son and is very interested in some of the same teaching issues that I am. And so we blog together at Katharine. It's a little complicated. Katharine, Katherine, and AND, Katharine, Katharine, at .wordpress.com. So that's a sort of every occasional once or twice a week kind of posts thoughts on various teaching and learning issues, a lot of which are related to autism.
But I want to thank you so much, Katharine, for sharing your ideas with me and with our listeners. And as you can imagine, there's much more to do, listeners. So please check out Katharine's recent publication, Students with Autism, How to Improve Language, Literacy, and Academic Success. And you can find out more information in the show notes.
On behalf of John Catt Educational, thank you for listening to this episode of Author Chats. To access other podcasts in this series, visit edcircuit.com for a complete lineup of engaging topics. EdCircuit empowers the voices of education with hundreds of trusted contributors, changemakers, and industry-leading education innovators. This episode was produced by MindRocket Media Group. For more information, please visit mindrocketmediagroup.com to discover how you can be our next satisfied client.